Paul Skenes is one of the top pitching prospects in this year's MLB draft, and I got a chance to look at his pitch shape data, which is not public info. So let's dig into it and unravel what we think he'll be at the major league level. And we'll start with some basics. Skenes' release point is 5 feet 11 inches, which is right around the major league average. He matches the release point for his sinker and slider, his most used 2 pitches. His extension is the more interesting thing. He's around 5'8" for his four seam and 5'3" for his slider. So he shorts his extension there slightly on his slider, and he gets to the side of the ball. And doing that, this isn't uncommon per se at the major league level, but overall you would classify his extension as well below average. He's a super rotational pitcher. He doesn't drive down the mound much. And you can see that when you compare him from the side next to somebody who's maybe more average extension in Major League Baseball. Skenes' fastball extension would be 3rd percentile in Major League Baseball. So 97% of pitchers release their fastball from further down the mound than him. It's not a death sentence per se. A few guys around that extension, that low of extension, include Julio Urias from the Dodgers, Jesus Luzardo from the Marlins, both lefties, and then a righty in Luis Castillo. But it's a variable to consider with Skenes. It makes him a bit unique. And I think it's one of the most important things to point out about his delivery. Now let's get to his mix and velocity. I have him throwing one fastball, a true two-seamer that averaged 97.2 miles per hour up to 100 as we've seen. Obviously, he's been a bit hotter in the College World Series in terms of velocity, so my velos might be slightly low, but I'm going to go off what I have. If you're convinced he's going to average, say, 100 miles per hour or greater in the majors as a starting pitcher, then you could probably boost everything a tick or two that I'm going to talk about going forward, and that'll bump up what I call his stuff plus grade, that combination of velo, release, and shape slightly as well. Another interesting thing on the fastball, there's a video out there where he shows his grips and toggles from a 4-seam fastball to a true 2-seam fastball. But in the plots that I've seen of his pitches in college, I don't really see any large differential between the 2 pitches. So my analysis will come from the idea that the fastballs are grouped together into one fastball, which I'm going to call a 2-seamer. The slider is about 84.2 miles per hour up to 88 miles per hour. He throws this fastball slider a combined 90% of the time. Obviously his 2 best pitches, and he throws them a ton. His changeup's about 88.2 miles per hour up to 90, and his curveball is 81.7 up to 84. Let's start with the fastball. There's a lot to unpack here. The pitch averages 15.5 inches of vertical break with 16 inches of arm side run up to 2,500 rotations per minute or RPMs. I have him at a 31% swing and miss on the pitch. The MLB average is around 22%. It's probably not a good comp to take that exact average from Major League Baseball down to college, but it kind of gives you some relative comparison here that he is missing a ton of bats with a 4-seam fastball, a bit inordinate for that particular pitch. He's in the zone with it a lot as well, 55% of the time, which is above what you'd expect from most fastballs in Major League Baseball, especially those thrown this hard. You probably take anything below 50% as just about average. Now you'll hear in the public space a bit that Skenes' fastball shape is poor or maybe average or slightly below average, whatever you want to classify it as. And I got to respond to that. I think for the most part, what that's doing is just isolating off a single variable that makes up the whole package that is his 4-seam fastball. And in saying that, it's kind of unnecessarily doing that. We have both variables here. We have velocity and we have shape. They're both readily available, and we can combine them together and consider them in tandem. Most of the time when you're throwing this hard, you're not going to have crazy exceptional shape on the pitch, right? His velocity, throwing upper 90s, averaging 97 miles per hour, touching 102, 103 in the College World Series, buys him margin for error on the shape. That, I think, is incredibly important to consider, the combination of both those variables. If you look at the major league level too, there are not a ton of guys throwing incredibly hard that have great shape. We've gotten so smitten with that carry and ride that we always look for that and say that's good shape. But in reality, good velocity will most of the time get you to a plus fastball just by existing. And as long as you're not getting in this really tiny area of poor fastball shape, then velocity is going to carry you to the promised land, so to speak. Skenes is also throwing kind of a true 2-seamer for the most part. So I don't think he's ever really a guy, based on how he supinates and gets around the ball, that's going to be able to create that hop and carry that we kind of associate with good fastball shape. And because he's throwing that 2-seam, it's going to run more than sink, as we're going to get into in a second. So his mix and what he does as a pitcher from that fastball slot is not maybe what we're used to, but it's still an effective offering. If you want to say the shape is bad, that's fine, but you can't say that without also considering the velocity variable, which makes the pitch clearly plus. If you look at Driveline Baseball's stuff plot for pitches between 96 and 100 miles per hour, again, it's really hard to get to that blue area where you consider a fastball at this velocity a below average pitch. We also find that the run he gets on his fastball helps the grade. You could see that with the concentration of red over here on the right side of the stuff plot, which is more arm side run on the fastball. And there kind of isn't a comp for his fastball in the major leagues right now. Closest you get, if you sort based on averaging about 97 plus miles per hour as a starter with below average extension and similar arm side run, is a guy like Sandy Alcantara from the Marlins, but Alcantara's extension is a bit higher. I think something like Brusdar Graterol, the reliever for the Dodgers, is in the realm too, because him and Skenes have similar extension and Brusdar's pitch runs. It sinks more than Skenes. So again, you're looking at kind of an odd territory of Skenes throwing a true two-seamer that's taking off arm side from short extension at high velocity. So you blend Sandy Alcantara and Brusdar together, I think you kind of get to Skenes. Now onto his slider. This pitch averages 6 inches of vertical break with 12 inches of sweep, up to 2,600 rotations per minute. He generated a 66% swing and miss on this pitch in college this year, which is just stupid. It's nearly double what you'd expect from a slider. It's only in zone about 38% of the time, which is right around average at the major league level in terms of sliders, maybe slightly below. And he's generating above average chase on it as well. The reality is I think that hitters are just not picking up this pitch, not expecting the kind of movement they're getting with that lift. And that's allowing it to play outside of the zone and generate a ton of chase. Running this through Driveline Baseball's Stuff Plus model gives you a 122, so 22% better than the average slider. This is a pretty classic sweeper slider to me. You can see him gripping the tracks of the ball right here. And I would bet there are some seam effects going on here that allow him to release it with some top spin, kind of get to the front of the ball as a curveball. The ball will pick up vertical break or lift in flight. And that's a key thing to point out. He gets more vertical break or lift than the average sweeper. And this is pretty common among guys with slightly lower arm angles like him. And it just allows them to be underneath the ball slightly at release. So the resulting vertical break, the resulting lift that you get is just a little bit more. You're not releasing it so much as a curveball and it's moving up to slider territory. You're almost already releasing it as a slider and it's lifting more into like a blended rising slider area. The average sweeper has about 2 inches of vertical break and Skenes has 6 inches for reference. So about 4 more inches than normal from a slider. When you factor in Skenes' extension and release, comps are a bit tough to zero in on at the major league level. I thought of Logan Webb's sweeper, but Webb extends down the mound really well and doesn't get as much lift on that pitch as we're talking about with Skenes. Lucas Sims, the reliever for the red slider, is maybe in the area because of the lift he gets on it, but he spins the ball a bit more than Skenes, and Jacob Junis is maybe another one, is in that area as well. He developed a sweeper recently, but again, Skenes is getting more lift. And regardless of how close we get on the comps here, this slider is nasty. It pairs well with the two-seamer. It generates crazy swing and miss. I don't really see any reason to doubt that it's anything less than an above average breaking ball at the major league level. I just think it fits really well with the two-seam. Both those pitches running off two seams, similar grips for him. He's just kind of rotating the ball and obviously getting behind one a little bit more than in front of the ball for the sweeper. It works really well in tandem. This is a nasty combo. It's going to devastate right-handed hitting. Lastly, I'll touch on both the curveball and the slider together because he doesn't throw them both more than like 10% combined. In college this year, the changeup has 9 inches of vertical break with 16 inches of arm side run, generating, again, a crazy 56% swing and miss here, which is just nuts. It's nearly double, again, what you'd expect for a changeup. And the problem here maybe is that it's really never in the zone, just 20% of the time. So it's purely, to me, kind of a deep count offering to try and get some chase, which he has done really well with the pitch. The pitch itself is maybe more of a velocity separator, and I'm betting he just sells the heck out of it and is able to throw it hard, arm speed, and it works really well against SEC hitting. I'd be curious if there's a way for him to kill more spin on the pitch and get below the 1900 RPMs that he's currently averaging on the changeup, but I'm not entirely sure that's the case. You see his grip is kind of splitting between the tracks there, between the two seams, and I think that just allows it to kind of sell, but it's not necessarily a grip that I think is going to kill a ton of spin for him. He's also, again, a natural supernator. He gets around the ball really well. So I don't really think he's ever going to be able to get a ton of drop on that changeup. The fun thing would be to consider him going to an organization that has a better understanding of seam effects than, say, LSU does on their player development side of things, and getting him to a different orientation of the ball and maybe a different changeup grip that allows him to kind of shift the axis of the ball down in flight, that allows for that added drop, as opposed to him having to naturally pronate and create that drop. Lastly, let's touch on his curveball. This is his least used pitch. It resembles his slider a lot with just a bit more drop and vertical break. So it's down to -5 inches of vertical break, where we saw that slider up at 6 inches positive vertical break, 10 inches of sweep on the curveball, 2800 RPMs, generating about a 70% swing and miss, which is bananas. But again, we're looking at a pretty small sample of swings here, especially because of how much out of the zone this pitch is. He only gets into the zone about 20% of the time. So the swings that he does get are probably just bad chases from undisciplined hitters. I'm not sure how much chase he'll get on it in pro ball, but again, it's a piece of his repertoire to consider. He spins the ball so well that I imagine he'll want to play around with it more to help out with potential platoon splits if he's having trouble versus better left-handed hitting. Because I do believe he'll be better versus righties and lefties in pro ball. And this is a piece of the repertoire. It's just maybe one he doesn't really need at all right now. In sum, Paul Skenes is an elite fastball slider pitcher with peripheral options that I think will continue to be refined at the major league level in that changeup and the curveball. I see no reason to think the fastball and the slider will not play at the major league level. He spins them a ton. They're kind of unique outlier shapes. The extension is definitely a weird overarching point that I'm not entirely sure how to interpret. I'm curious whether a team gets him back to where he was at his Air Force days when he was extending down the mound more. But it's also important to note that he wasn't throwing as hard, so maybe there is something with him being such a rotational athlete that you keep him at low extension and you allow everything to kind of play off what he currently does. Don't fix it if it's not broken, right? So let's see how he does in pro ball and go from there. If you want to think ahead to a development item that might come through for him, I think it's pretty obvious to bridge the gap between the two seam and the slider, throw something in the middle like a cutter. I'd be really interested to see if he could get to more of like a gyro slider. This is what Logan Gilbert throws, where he spikes the ball and just creates this football rotation bullet spin, allows it to drop to the plate. He gets his over 85 miles per hour. I imagine Skenes could get his around that too. But I'm not a pitching coach. I'm not entirely sure how his arm mechanics would work, whether he could get to that specific kind of bullet slider shape. And if he does it and gets under the ball a lot, like he does for his kind of sweeper slider, then maybe we're just looking at more of a traditional cutter, which could still be a really effective pitch for him, especially if he develops platoon splits at the major league level and is more effective versus righties than lefties. So thanks for hanging around for this entire video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've hung around this far, I want to know one thing from you in the comments. What do you think the probability is that Paul Skenes is the best pitcher from this draft class? Give me an exact number. We'll chat in the comments. And also let me know if you think the Pirates should take him 1-1. So thanks for hanging around.